Hi, I'm Jill Chivers.
And I'm Imogen Lamport, and we're from 16 Style Types. One of the issues that many people have when they're trying to define their type or figure out their type preferences is weeding out what is innate versus what is learned behaviour.
Yeah.
And this can be tricky, that particularly the older you get and the more life experience you have, that this can get trickier and trickier to actually weed it out and go, well, what have I learnt to do versus what's my innate preference? Because really type is about discovering your innate preferences. It's what's easy for you, what comes naturally, what takes no energy.
Yeah. So one of the models that we use is developed by Linda Behrens, and it's a model with 3 circles, and in the middle of it is core self, and then she has developed self as the next circle out, and the final circle is contextual self. And I find this a really, really helpful model because all of us have a contextual self, which is in this moment, who do I have to be, what am I required to be, who am I choosing to be, based on all of the circumstances that I find myself in, from the weather to the outcomes to the people I'm with.
And it can be things like, I know in a job I had where I had to extrovert a lot. I had to go out, run events, go up and speak to people I didn't know, welcome everybody. And so that is outside of my core self. But that was, I used to look at it, this is a role I'm playing, as if I was acting.
Yeah, which is, I think, an excellent way of making sense of behaviours that have to be developed to do that job. But it can also be put into the context of, is this where I want to be? Because sometimes type can lead you to those forks in the road. Your developed self is a combination of your core self plus skills you have had to learn and you have become very, very good at. And this is when it gets the trickiest. Contextual self, most of us can weed out, well, I had to be that, but I know it's not me. Developed self is when you develop a set of skills, either from very early on, thinking, growing up in a feeling household, sensing, growing up in an intuitive household, introvert, growing up surrounded by extroverts, through to work environments. I know for me, I really struggled with between T and F for a long time because I grew up in a household with a mother with a thinking preference, and then I studied business, and then I went into a big 6 consulting firm, which is pure T, and I became very, very good at that, and I went into project management, IT project management.
That's all T.
Well, you can't survive in that environment unless you're good at that.
Yes.
But I had enough struggles that other people didn't seem to. They didn't find these speed bumps all the time that I sort of kept stumbling over. So I knew that I was a little out of step on some level. Discovering this was like, just walking into a darkened room and flipping on a light switch.
Yeah.
It was really fantastic. So my developed self has a very well-developed sets of skills around thinking because I've had to. But my core self has feeling as my preference.
Yes. And I think that's something that's also really interesting, say as women who might be natural thinkers, that particularly when you have children, that makes you develop your feeling function more for most of us, particularly if we're healthy, because we have to be always putting some other person's need ahead of our own. And so I think particularly, parenthood and mothering of small children does make you develop that feeling function in a way that if you, just because it's like, I don't want to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning and then 6 o'clock in the morning and then be up at 11 o'clock, that's not my, if I had a choice, but I know that I have to do that. That's just part of it, to know that that person's needs are beyond my own.
Another thing that can happen is, as we develop, Carl Jung's theory of psychological health and individuation was that we would start to develop, we would naturally be drawn into non-dominant auxiliary preference areas to develop that psychological balance. This can happen particularly, I have found, with extroversion and introversion and judging and perceiving, that people will say, well, I'm an ambivert. My version, our version of the world is ambiversion does not exist. You may hold a different view, but that is our view, because it doesn't need to exist. Just because you have a preference for extroversion doesn't mean you never introvert. Just because you have a preference for introversion doesn't mean you never access extroversion. That's absurd to imagine such a circumstance. And so this can also, we can get confused. I mean, I have worked with many extroverts who say, but I need quiet time. And my answer is, of course you need quiet time. Of course you do.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you don't have a preference for extroversion. That is about where energy comes from and goes to. And whether you're energized by being around people and things, and that lifts your energy, and then you use introversion for balance. This is really different to a preference for introversion, which is this necessary solitude. It is psychologically just, life cannot be lived without it.
Yes. And I think too, it's interesting with the extroversion, introversion, particularly as we get older, that, and I think part of this is just the physicality, or if someone's had an illness.
Right.
That, you know, particularly, you know, say an extrovert who's got an illness will appear much more introverted because their body needs more time to recuperate.
Yes.
And especially as we get older, we learn we just can't burn the candle at both ends like we did when we were younger.
Yes.
We just don't have that same energy. So a lot of people say, oh, I used to be an extrovert, but now I'm an introvert. And it's they haven't changed. It's just that they've realised that they need more recouping time.
Yes.
And that they can't burn the candle. And they actually often start to enjoy that solitude. And they might have developed some hobbies, or I like to read a book. And you just can't read a book around a whole lot of people who are talking, you know.
And look, as a card-carrying extrovert, there is no question about my preference for extroversion. As I've had life experiences, some of them painful, I have felt myself withdrawing a little bit from the world out of psychological necessity. And so you could look at where I am now and say, well, she's kind of she has many qualities of an introvert. I know I don't have a preference for introversion, but I need it. Also, I have learned that sometimes engaging the mouth without letting enough settling time or asking enough questions or doing all of that reflection leads me to a place I don't want to be. I have learned to factor in reflection time because I always get a better result, a better answer as a result of that. Even though my natural tendency is, you could ask me now any question or almost anything and I could talk for probably 5 minutes about stuff and it would be rubbish, but I could do it and I would probably find it fun, it would probably be entertaining. It just wouldn't be informed.
So I think when you're trying to go, well, how do I weed out what is learned versus what is innate?
Yes.
It can be looking back on earlier life.
Yes, that can be very helpful.
It can also be what drains me.
Yes.
If something is like, I can do it, but it's more draining, that's
effortful, conscious, effortful.
Where you go, you know, and this is where often it's they'll look at it going, if I could do anything, what would it be?
Yeah.
You know, like, so there was no have to, should have, could have, would have, you know, like that, because we can all have to. We can all, you know, I have to do this, I can do this. When you know, get rid of those words and just go, if I had a choice that, nobody, there's no pressure on me.
If the world let me be who I really am,
what would that be? And I think if you can look at that and go, yeah, well, I've learnt to do that. It doesn't mean that I really love doing that.
The other thing that can affect people who are doing multiple free online personality quizzes is the impact of two things, mood and circumstance.
Yes.
And they say, I'm getting different results. And often when you inquire as to why that is, it's because mood and circumstances have changed. So independent of mood and circumstance, who are you? And then you're starting to get closer to core self and who you really are. This is never intended, and if it's done correctly, it should never feel limiting. It should feel the opposite. It should feel liberating. From this place of home, I can go into so many other places. As an extrovert, knowing what energizes me means that being in an environment where I'm having to be more introverted gives me choices that knowledge can never give me. So it should empower you and enlighten you and in many respects transform you when you know this. It's not a cutting off of options, it's an expanding of them.
Because of course we can all learn skills. So just because I have a preference for introversion or I have a preference for intuition, I have a preference for thinking, doesn't mean I can't do the other things. And so it's not about like you can only do this. But I know that they're the easy things for me. They're the more enjoyable. I can go into the nitty-gritty detail when I really have to, but it's not where I go to first.
And in another video, we might talk about some of the ways you can work with somebody or interact, if it's on a personal level, with someone whose preferences are really different to yours, because there's a whole swathe of techniques and strategies and principles and attitudes about that might be useful to this conversation of what is learned versus what is innate.
Yes. So hopefully that's kind of given you a little bit more insight into when you're thinking about, am I looking at innate or versus learned behaviour? So when you're making the decisions, when you're going through our best fit type process, keep taking it back to, nobody's making me do something.
Yes.
What do I, if there's no societal expectation, what do I do? All those sorts of things, just going, well, what's the easy thing for me? And I think that's when you'll start to get more into what is my innate preference versus what I've learned, what I can do, what I have done. They are learned behaviours.
So either in the comments or emailing us or on Facebook, get in touch with us. We would really love to know your experiences of teasing out the difference between these two things and what you found was really helpful in helping you come home to what is innate for you.